In the winter of 1943, Soviet soldiers defending Sevastopol heard something they had never heard before. Not the whistle of artillery, not the scream of dive bombers. A sound like a freight train being hurled through the sky. Then impact. Buildings didn't just collapse, they vaporized. Entire city blocks erased in single explosions. What they were facing was the Karl-Gerät, a self-propelled mortar so massive it could only be described as mobile artillery madness. 600 millimeters wide, 2-ton shells. A weapon so impractical that only 7 were ever built. Yet it worked. And before this story ends, you'll learn why the Germans themselves came to fear what they had created. The Karl-Gerät wasn't born from battlefield necessity. It was born from obsession. In the 1930s, German military planners faced a problem that haunted them from the Great War. The Maginot Line, the Belgian forts, concrete fortifications that could shrug off conventional artillery. The German army wanted something that could crack open any bunker, any fortification, anywhere in Europe. They wanted a hammer of the gods. What they got was something far stranger. The order went to Rheinmetall Borsig in 1937. Build us the largest self-propelled gun ever conceived. The specifications read like fiction. A shell heavy enough to penetrate meters of reinforced concrete. A chassis that could move under its own power. A weapon that could be deployed without railway infrastructure. Engineers told their superiors it was impossible. The recoil alone would tear any vehicle apart. But the Reich didn't accept impossible. They demanded results. What emerged from the Rheinmetall factories defied every convention of artillery design. The Karl-Gerät measured over 11 meters long and nearly 5 meters tall. It weighed 124 metric tons. Fully loaded, closer to 130. Its 600 millimeter barrel was so wide, a grown man could crawl inside. The entire machine sat on massive Daimler-Benz tracks, borrowed from the Panzer IV tank program, widened and reinforced to support the colossal weight. It didn't look like a tank. It didn't look like artillery. It looked like something built to destroy cities. The barrel itself was a masterpiece of metallurgy and madness. 4.7 meters of cast steel rifled to spin shells the size of oil drums. The breech mechanism alone weighed several tons. Loading wasn't a simple matter of sliding in around. It required a crew of 21 men and a specialized crane vehicle that followed each Karl-Gerät into position. The crane lifted each 2-ton shell from a transport trailer, carefully guided it into position, then lowered it into the breech. 1 round every 10 to 15 minutes. This wasn't rapid fire. This was siege warfare at its most methodical and brutal. The shells came in 2 variants, each more devastating than most bombs dropped from aircraft. The standard high explosive round weighed 2,170 kilograms. Over 2 tons of hardened steel packed with high explosive. When it hit, the explosion created a crater 12 meters wide and 4 meters deep. Reinforced concrete shattered like glass. The second variant was even heavier, 2,500 kilograms. A bunker-busting penetrator designed to punch through the thickest fortifications before detonating inside. The shockwave alone could kill every person in a multi-story building. But here's where the Karl-Gerät crossed from impressive into impossible. The recoil. Firing a 2-ton shell generates recoil forces that would flip a conventional tank like a toy. Rheinmetall's solution was elegant and terrifying. They mounted the barrel at a 70-degree angle, nearly vertical. The Karl-Gerät didn't fire its shells, it threw them, like a medieval trebuchet reimagined in steel and explosives. The barrel recoiled backward along massive hydraulic buffers that absorbed the shock. The entire chassis rocked backward half a meter with each shot. Crews reported the ground shaking for hundreds of meters around the firing position. Trees lost their leaves. Windows shattered in nearby buildings. It was a weapon that announced itself to everyone within sight and sound. Before we go on, if forgotten and impossible war machines fascinate you, subscribe to Forgotten War Relics and hit the bell so you never miss one. Range was the weapon's fatal compromise. With the lighter shell, maximum range reached just 6,300 meters, 6 kilometers. A modern howitzer can fire 5 times that distance. The heavier penetrator round reached only 4,300 meters. The Karl-Gerat had to get close, dangerously close, within sight of enemy fortifications, within range of counter-battery fire. This wasn't standoff bombardment. This was point-blank siege warfare with a weapon the size of a house. Moving the Karl-Gerät was an operation that required military precision and railway logistics. The machine could travel under its own power at 10 kilometers per hour on perfect roads for short distances. Any long-distance movement required partially disassembling the weapon, loading it onto specialized railway cars and transporting it by train. Then reassembly at the destination. Each Karl-Gerät needed a support column of over 300 men, engineers, crane operators, ammunition handlers, security troops, mechanics. It wasn't a weapon. It was a traveling military installation. 7 units were built between 1940 and 1941. Each one received a name like battleships: Adam, Eve, Thor, Odin, Loki, Zeus. The 7th unit remained unnamed, cobbled together from spare parts after the others were deployed. Total cost for the program exceeded the budget of building multiple panzer divisions. Some German commanders quietly questioned whether 7 immobile super mortars were worth more than hundreds of mobile tanks, but by then the Karl-Gerats were rolling towards the Eastern Front, and they were about to prove that sometimes impossible weapons actually work. The first Karl-Gerat fired in combat on July 30th, 1941. Target Brest-Litovsk Fortress. The ancient Star Fort on the Polish-Soviet border had withstood German assault for over a week. Standard artillery couldn't penetrate the 19th century brick and earthwork defenses. Infantry attacks stalled in the killing grounds between bastions. Soviet defenders held cellars and casemates. The Wehrmacht needed something that could crack open fortifications designed to resist siege cannons. Thor arrived by rail. The first 2-ton shell landed inside the fortress at 1100 hours. Witnesses reported the explosion created a crater 12 meters across. The shockwave collapsed interior walls 300 meters from impact. Debris rained down for nearly a minute. The fortress defenders had never experienced anything like it. Neither had the German troops watching. 4 more shells followed that afternoon. Each one pulverized sections of the fortress that conventional artillery had barely scratched. By evening, Soviet resistance in the targeted sectors had ceased. Not because the defenders retreated, because the structures they occupied no longer existed. Brest-Litovsk fell 2 days later. The Karl-Gerats saw their most intensive use during the siege of Sevastopol in 1942. 6 units deployed to the Crimean Peninsula. Their target was the most heavily fortified naval base in the Soviet Union. Sevastopol's defenses included coastal gun batteries in reinforced concrete bunkers, underground ammunition depots carved into cliff faces, and troop shelters designed to withstand battleship guns. German siege artillery had hammered the city for months with a minimal effect. The Soviet garrison held. Between June 2nd and July 4th, 1942, the Karl-Gerats fired approximately 300 shells into Sevastopol's fortifications. Each detonation was a localized earthquake. Fort Maxim Gorky 1, a coastal battery with 305mm guns protected by meters of reinforced concrete, took multiple direct hits. The Karl shells didn't penetrate the roof armor. They broke the concrete itself. Structural cracks spiderwebbed through the entire fortification. Gun mechanisms jammed from the shockwaves. Ventilation systems collapsed. The fort became uninhabitable, but the Karl-Gerats paid a price. Constant firing stressed the barrels beyond design limits. After fewer than 100 rounds, barrel wear became critical. Accuracy degraded. The rate of fire, already glacial, slowed further as crews struggled with mechanical failures. One unit suffered a catastrophic breech failure. 2 crew members died instantly. The barrel was destroyed. Transporting replacement barrels from Germany to Crimea took weeks, and while the Karl-Gerats were devastating against fixed fortifications, they were helpless against mobile targets or counter-battery fire. Soviet artillery observers learned to calculate firing positions from the massive muzzle flashes. Return fire followed minutes later. The Karl-Gerats survived because they could retreat after firing. But retreat at 10 kilometers per hour meant prolonged exposure. Several units took damage from shell splinters. One lost its crane vehicle to a direct hit, crippling its ability to reload. After Sevastopol, the Karl-Gerats saw limited action. Warsaw Uprising in 1944. A handful of shots during urban fighting, but by then, Germany was losing. Resources needed to maintain these mechanical monsters could have supported entire infantry divisions. The specialized ammunition production diverted materials from standard artillery shells. Each Karl-Gerät tied up hundreds of men who could have served elsewhere. The military calculus that justified super heavy siege weapons in 1940 no longer made sense in 1944. By war's end, most Karl-Gerats had been destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture. One unit was abandoned near Berlin, its fuel exhausted, its crew scattered. Soviet forces found it days later. American troops captured another during the final advance into Germany. Both were studied, photographed, and eventually scrapped. The age of super heavy artillery was over. Aerial bombardment could deliver more explosive force with greater flexibility. Rockets could strike from beyond visual range. The logic that created the Karl-Gerät had been rendered obsolete by technologies it helped inspire. Today, only fragments remain. A breech mechanism in a Russian museum, photographs in German archives, craters in Sevastopol, now filled and paved over. The Karl-Gerät exists primarily as a footnote, an engineering curiosity, an example of wartime excess, 7 weapons that cost as much as armored divisions, hundreds of shells that required their own supply trains, thousands of man-hours to move, assemble, and fire machines that could have been replaced by bombers. But for the Soviet defenders at Brest-Litovsk and Sevastopol, the Karl-Gerät was neither a footnote nor a curiosity. It was a demonstration that the impossible could be built, that engineers could create weapons beyond rational scale, that 2-ton shells could fall from the sky and erase fortifications in single strikes. The Karl-Gerat worked. It just didn't work well enough to justify its existence, and that's perhaps the strangest legacy of all. An impossible weapon that succeeded at everything except being worth the cost. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to Forgotten War Relics for more of the strangest machines history forgot.